Hello, my name is Arjuna, and today I'm going to be taking you through my audio setup that I use for podcasting. Now, a lot of people have asked me about how I get the sound so clear on my podcasts, and so this video is an attempt to address that. And just quick plug for my podcast, which I run with my co-host Robin. It's called Listening Glass, and you can find the link for that in the notes below this video. Take a look down there, check it out. And so here we go. Now, what I'm going to be showing you today is just the hardware setup. I'll do a separate video, and I'll try to put it at the end of this video when it's done to talk about the software side, but today we're just going to talk about the hardware. So let's get into it. All right. So a couple of things you'll notice. First of all, my sound is not very good in this video. That's because I'm using the sound from my webcam because I have my hardware unplugged so I can show it to you. So anyway, bear that in mind. So let's start first things first with microphones. So this microphone that I'm using here is the Shure SM57, and this is an industry standard microphone. I mean, it's used in studios everywhere, and it's probably the most cost-effective microphone ever invented. I mean, the thing sounds amazing, and you can get them used for, I got this one here used for 50 US dollars. I just purchased another one recently for 60 US dollars. This is what the microphone looks like when it doesn't have a windscreen on it. These mics are just utterly amazing, okay? So, and what I've got on this is a windscreen, also made by the same company, Shure. The windscreen model number is A81S. Actually, I think it's A81WS. Yeah. And so let's talk about the mic first, though. Why are these mics so good for podcasting? I mean, they're good for a lot of things, but why are they so good for podcasting? The main reason is because they have really excellent, what they call off-axis rejection. So this microphone is designed to be spoken into from one direction only, from the front end. And pretty much all of the sound that's coming from around it or behind it it's trying to pick that up as little as possible. This makes it really excellent as a vocal mic because you just want to put it right in front of your mouth and speak directly into it, and you don't really want for it to capture any other noise. Your other noises could be from your computer, they could be from the echo around the room. You're probably hearing a fair amount of that in my webcam mic right now. If you have any kind of hum in your building, if you have loud neighbors, whatever, you are going to want to pick up as little of that sound as possible. It's a lot harder to edit it out than it is to just not pick it up to begin with. So these Shure dynamic microphones are really excellent. So highly recommended, very cheap. You can also get the Shure SM58, which is a similar model to the SM57. The 58 is actually designed with vocals in mind, whereas the 57 is designed to be a bit more of an all-purpose / instrument microphone. The reason why I've chosen the 57 over the 58 is that the 57 accepts the windscreen, whereas this would be a lot harder to fit onto your SM58. So now let's talk about this windscreen. Why is this windscreen so great? The reason is that this is going to block all of the pops and the plosive sounds, all of my P's. Pa, pa, pa. What happens is when you're speaking directly into a microphone and you make these noises, the pop really disrupts the audio and it sounds terrible. So you need for a way to conquer that. Now, the best way that I've discovered, and it's not my discovery, but This particular model of Shure windscreen is just amazing for that. It pretty much completely blocks any of the pops and any of the other noises. Now you can get, actually I'll show you, I got one of these in the back of my studio. So some people use a thing like this, which you set up in front of the microphone, and this is also designed to prevent your P's and your plosives. The problem is these just don't work nearly as well as this thing does. And this also preserves the good sound of your voice, which the other one does as well. But basically, just get one of these, put it on your Shure microphone. It's a little expensive. These cost about $30 US, but it's just so worth it. It's just absolutely worth it. So for under the price of $100 US, you can get a really fantastic sounding microphone. So a lot of people, when they're getting into podcasting or recording their voice, they will do a little Googling and they'll discover like the Yeti microphones or the Blue microphones. And these are USB generally. They just plug straight into your computer via USB. And they sound pretty good. And you can plug your headphones right into them. So it's kind of an all-in-one solution. Now, so people ask me, why don't you just use one of them? It's a good question. They work quite well. And so if you just want to drop like $100 and be done with it, then you can get one of those. The thing is, they actually don't, if you're really going for a polished sound, they're not going to quite cut it. There's a few reasons for that. One of them is that those Blue microphones are condenser microphones. They're a lot more sensitive. They're designed to pick up a lot more sound. So they don't have that off-axis rejection like I was talking about with these Shure microphones. They're also not dynamic. Dynamic microphones are less sensitive. Now, you might think for professional recording that you want a very sensitive microphone, but that's not really the case. You want it to be sensitive enough to pick up your voice clearly, but not so sensitive that it's hearing, what the flies in your room had for breakfast. So anyway, the setup that I'm outlining here is, I believe, the best budget setup that's going to get you a really quality sounding recording. So once you have the microphone, you're going to need something to plug it into. This is an XLR microphone, which means it takes a regular 3-pin XLR microphone cable. And you can't jack these straight into your computer, so you need something to plug them into. So that's where my interface comes in. Okay. So we're going to talk about this M-Audio card here. Now, this thing's really old. It's a Fast Track Pro USB. I probably wouldn't recommend buying one of these anymore, but I'll outline some of the things that you want to be looking for in your audio interface. You want it to be USB. Now, these days they're making some USB-C ones. This is early 2019 that I'm recording this. They'll plug into Thunderbolt, USB-C, but the basic thing that you're looking for is that you want an interface which has inserts on it. Now, these inserts, hold on. So these inserts here are really key. And what these allow you to do is they allow you to plug in outboard gear like my compressor here. And I'll explain why that's important in a moment. But a lot of the cheap USB recording devices, outboard interfaces, they're called, don't come with these inserts. So you want to make sure that yours does. Now, it's actually labeled on here. I don't know if you can see that text on the camera, but it's labeled inserts. You want to actually look on the back before you purchase the device and make sure that it has these inserts. You can also read that in the technical details. So again, a lot of devices leave them out, but you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money to get a device that does have them. You just need to make sure the device you're getting has them. So there are any number of devices, you need to be careful. Like, for example, the Scarlett interfaces are very popular right now, and those do not have the inserts. However, there are some Behringer devices that do, like the 204 HD, which is really excellent. Just purchase one of those for Robin. And those have the inserts. So most of the rest of the features are kind of standard on these. And I just want to stress that you don't need to spend a lot of money. Like, you really don't. You can spend under $100 US and get something that's really going to be more than sufficient. People will go on and on about the quality of your preamps, and I'll address that in a little while. But most of the time, these things are totally sufficient. So now let's talk about why you would want an outboard compressor. So an outboard compressor is, it's basically what keeps your volume consistent. And this is more important to pro audio than it might seem at first. So why is this so important? The reason is that during the regular, when a person is speaking, their voice has a very regular rise and fall to it. And then and you want to get that as smooth as possible and as even as possible, because that's what we're used to on the radio. Radios make heavy use of compression. They actually have multiple stages of compression. And that's part of the reason the voices sound so even and smooth to you. And it's a subtle effect, but once you get used to it, you can immediately notice the difference. Another reason they're really important is that anytime you do anything particularly loud, like if you get animated in your talking, or if you laugh, or if you cough, something like that, you actually have the potential to distort, to push your microphone beyond the amount of gain that it ideally wants. And that can actually create digital distortion and sounds really terrible. So you need to avoid that at all costs. And one of the best ways to do that is to have an outboard compressor. Now, they have software compressors, which we make use of as well on the software side. The problem is that they don't affect the audio coming into your computer. So if the audio has already distorted before it even gets to your software, there's no way you're going to be able to fix that with a software compressor. That's why you need a hardware compressor. So this one that I've got is kind of generally agreed to be the absolute best for the price, and it's called the FMR Audio RNC 1773. So just Google that, RNC 1773, it'll come up. This one cost me $140 US. That was brand new on eBay. You can get them used for more like 120, maybe even 100. Well worth the money, okay? This is one of the main things that's going to take your podcast recording or any kind of vocal recording from sounding like an amateur recording to sounding like a professional recording. So don't skimp on this. Now, I'm not going to go really into the details of how compressors work. I'll put a link in the notes of this video that can explain to you a bit more. But one nice thing about these RNCs is that if you notice, all of the knobs are in kind of the 10 to 11 o'clock position here. And that is actually a really fine setting to use. So if you pull one of these out, you don't know what to do, just start with that. Put them all at about 10 o'clock, and that's going to be a pretty easy, simple, painless approach, and you're going to start to get good results. Another nice thing about these is they have this button right here, super nice. Again, it looks like the text might not be showing up very well, but this button is the super nice setting. You can just turn that on, and it basically, you don't need to touch the rest of the controls. It just automatically decides what's going to sound best. And it's not going to get it precisely if there's a particular thing that your voice needs or your setup needs. but it's a really good place to start. And if you feel overwhelmed by using one of these things, that's what you can do. All right. So, so now, you know, with all the stuff we've discussed so far, the microphone plus windscreen, a little under $100. The compressor's a little over $100. The interface, if you're thrifty, will be a little under $100. So we're talking about $300 US here so far for a nice setup. Now, you'll notice that I also have this piece of gear. Let's just show you this. Now, this is an M-Audio DMP3. This is an outboard preamp. And the main reason I've got one of these is that it adds gain to my signal. So one of the things that kind of sucks about these cheap interfaces is that that preamps tend to not have very much gain, or to phrase it another way, they tend to often not have very much clean gain. So they might have like 50 decibels of gain. And if you crank them all the way up, which is what you would need to do if you're using one of these dynamic mics that's not very sensitive, if you crank it all the way up, you're going to start to hear hiss, and it's not going to sound nice. Again, it's going to sound amateur. So one of the ways that you get around that, you could buy an interface that has nicer preamps, but those cost a lot more money. A more effective thing to do is to buy an outboard preamp, and they're going to give you a lot more gain. Not all of them, but you know, you have to do a little research. So this preamp has 70 decibels of pretty clean gain. You can read that on the spec sheet, and that makes a big difference for getting a microphone like this to sound clear. And this thing probably cost me about $80 used. These are quite old and they can be hard to find. So there are other preamps that you can get to stand in place of them. But just remember, you're probably going to want to get something with about 70 decibels of gain. And then what I do is I just plug that into the front panel of my interface, and you'll notice I actually have the gain turned down, all the way down on both of these preamps. And it doesn't completely bypass the preamps, but it does as much as possible to take them out of the equation. So I'm only using the preamps from this. So that's about $400 US for my hardware setup. And that, just to give you a point of reference, to get like a professional sounding radio mic, like a Shure SM7, for example, or the Electro Voice RE20. Those are two of the standard radio microphones that you'll hear everywhere. So to buy one of those, that'll cost you about $400 right there. And for basically the same price, you can get your whole audio signal chain, and it will sound about 90% as good as using one of those. Now, if you do get one of those expensive microphones, it's probably worth spending even more money to get a better interface, better preamp, just to really maximize the sound of it. So then you're probably looking at a bit closer to $1,000. So it's my belief that a setup like the one that I've got is going to give you the best sound quality for price that you can get. So I'm a pretty firm believer. I've done a lot of research about this, and this is what I've come up with. So let me just explore one more thing. Another thing that people will often do for a microphone like this, or the Shure SM7, which I don't have, which is more expensive, they're very gain hungry. They need a lot of gain. So something that people might do is they might get a device called a Cloudlifter. That'll run you about $150 US. And that's an inline, you plug it you don't plug it directly into the microphone, but you run a cable from the microphone to the Cloudlifter and then to your interface. And what it does is it just adds what they call, it adds about 27 decibels of clean gain. So you won't really notice, your microphone won't hiss any more than it would have originally, but it will be louder. And it'll allow you to plug it directly into something like this so that you don't need your outboard preamp, but you'll still get a nice tone. Now, the reason I recommend the outboard preamp instead is that these devices are a lot more useful. You can often get one with 2 channels. So it'll basically do the same thing, but in 2 channels. And you can get something like that for about $150 US. And it's just a much more versatile piece of equipment. You can do more with it. So I think if you're going to spend that much money anyway, you may as well get something useful. But, you know, if you know what you want, you just want one microphone, you want it to sound really good, and you don't want to mess around with an outboard preamp, then you can just buy a Cloudlifter. And so even that microphone, windscreen, Cloudlifter, it's going to run you about $240 US, which is still substantially cheaper than any of those other microphones I suggested, and it's going to sound almost as good. So anyway, just one more note on hardware. This boom stand that I'm using here, this is made by a company called OC White, and they are really renowned. They make some of the best microphone booms and just general use booms that you can find. And they don't come cheap. This whole setup here, including the stand, which you have to buy separately, cost me a little under $200 US. So, you know, you don't need that necessarily. You can get like a desktop microphone stand, or you can get just like a regular boom microphone stand for under $100, which will do the trick. I just like the desktop one because it's small, it stays out of the way when you don't need it, and it does really well to get the microphone exactly where you need it. Now, you can get cheaper ones. Like you can get ones in the $80 to $100 range. I personally don't recommend them. I think that they're flimsy. If you read the reviews, you will often discover that people are disappointed with them. They don't stay in place. Maybe the microphone starts to fall down gradually, or maybe the whole thing starts to move gradually. It doesn't stay where you need it to. And that's a disaster if that's happening in the middle of your podcast, because every time you move this thing, it creates a significant amount of noise in the microphone, and it can be hard to edit out, especially if you're talking while it's happening. So I would recommend whatever kind of microphone stand you get a solid one. Make sure it's not moving while you're using it. So there you go. That is Arjuna's hardware guide for the best price to performance ratio. And join me for my next video where I'll talk about software, and also look down there below this video in the notes to get access to the Listening Glass podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, and catch you in my next video.